Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. Dr. Jules here, and today we're going to be talking about processed foods. Now, the reason I want to talk about ultra processed foods and the spectrum of how processing works is because yesterday I gave a chat to a school and received a lot of great questions and saw that this was still a concept that was not well understood by many. So, if we start by talking about food processing, not all food processing is good or bad. We can't clump them all together. Now, we have a food classification that's called the NOVA classification that puts processing on a spectrum, and I'll talk about that classification at some point. But today I want to focus on how to differentiate if something is highly processed or not. Now, keep in mind that processing includes altering the physical and or chemical properties of a food. So if you're talking about altering the physical properties of a food, well then freezing, blanching, blending, grinding, cutting, it's all considered a form of processing. Now, you can process chia seeds by grinding them and process flaxseed by grinding them. The chemistry of the food is still preserved, but its physical state changes. Now, someone will say, well, that's not processing then. Yes, it is, because the foods and the nutrient it contains are not always absorbed the same way. Sometimes processing makes the food better. I'll give you an example. If you grind chia seeds, you'll be better absorbing the omegas that they contain. If you grind flax seeds, you'll better absorb the lignans that it contains. So, processing is not always bad. It can actually improve. Cooking certain foods will destroy lectins and destroy phytates and actually make some of the minerals and vitamins more bioavailable, more available for absorption and use by your body. So, processing is not always bad. It can actually help release some of the nutrients. That's why we cook rice and we cook whole grains. We cook legumes. Well, but food processing can not only alter physical properties, it can actually alter the chemical properties of a food. Now, I'll give you an example. You can alter the physical properties of a food by removing certain things. Like, for example, if you take whole milk and you remove the fat and you make skim milk, you may be reducing the negative health impacts of that milk. Now, certain impacts are related specifically to the lactose it contains or specifically to the protein it contains, but there's no harm in reducing the intakes of saturated fat. And by going from a 3.25% milk to a skim milk, by reducing or defatting it, a form of processing, typically you maybe even made it healthier. The same thing goes for a lot of other different foods where removing certain things from that food may make it healthier. That's another example where the chemical properties of the food have been altered through processing, but it doesn't necessarily make it bad. Some would argue that we can improve certain types of foods through this process. We can also add things to foods as a form of processing that will alter the chemical content of that food, but also that's not always bad. Processing certain foods and fortifying them with minerals and vitamins is probably one of the major modern advancements in science and nutrition that we've experienced in the last few generations. We've prevented tons of goiter and thyroid dysfunction just by iodizing salt. And we're preventing neural tube defects like spina bifida by fortifying cereals with folic acid. So, fortification, like putting vitamin D and calcium in plant milks, and at some point, hopefully, even iodine in plant milks, is a type of fortification and processing that may even help prevent certain conditions. Now, that being said, what you're adding to it and what you're removing is always on a spectrum. So, to summarize, processing is on a spectrum that can be from bad to good, and processing includes altering the physical or the chemical structures of a food. The physical structures of a food can be altered, and some forms of physical processing can actually make it better for you, and some can make it worse. Same thing goes with the chemical processing. By removing certain things, we can make certain compounds of a food, we can make it healthier. But by removing fiber from plants in order to process it and to increase shelf life and stability, and to improve convenience, we may lose some of the health promoting effects of that food. Same thing goes with adding. We can add vitamins, add minerals. We can fortify foods to make them healthier, but sometimes what we're adding isn't always helpful. Sometimes we're adding preservatives, artificial colors, artificial flavors, certain dyes that may be linked with negative health outcomes. So I want you to see processing as a spectrum where the physical alteration of a food can be good or bad, and the chemical alteration of a food can be good or bad. That's why it's so difficult to differentiate between kind of the nuances that exist inside of the uh, processed food spectrum. And that's why the NOVA food classification is a great tool, but does have its limitations, because certain foods, like for example, Beyond Meat burgers or Impossible burgers, would be included in the ultra processed food category, where I don't think you can compare a chocolate bar with a Beyond Meat burger in terms of health benefits. Um, Processed soy protein and processed refined sugars and fat shouldn't be in the same categories. But unfortunately, candy bars and um, meat substitutes are included in the same highly processed food category. So some positives, some negatives to all food classifications. There are always a lot of nuances, and that's why that you just have to be careful. Cool. Peace.